I had been at hold 4 days before anyone told me about the dog, and even then they only told me so they could laugh. The posting had come down through 3 offices and a treaty annex none of us had read closely, the way most of my assignments did in those years. Junior liaison, human contingent, attached to a Kashun frontier garrison on a dust-colored world the maps called Tavi. The job was paperwork and patience. The Kashun held the eastern half of the system under an old accord, and humanity leased a strip of it for water rights and a refueling depot, and somebody had to sit in the middle of that arrangement and make sure the two halves did not start charging each other for air. That somebody was me. I was 26, 2 years into the service, and I had been chosen for the post, I think, because I was junior enough not to argue and stubborn enough not to quit. Hold 19 sat where the lease strip met the Kashun line, a low cluster of prefabs and water towers baking under a wide pale sky. The sun on Tavi was relentless and bright, a flat white light that came down on everything at once and left no honest shadows except under the eaves and the awnings. By mid-morning the dust plain shimmered. By mid-afternoon the metal of the towers was too hot to touch. The Kashun garrison occupied the high ground above the depot, a walled compound of their own pale stone, and from up there they looked down on the human strip the way you look at a thing you have agreed to tolerate. The Kashun were tall, taller than us by a head, and built along heavier lines, with a hide that ran from slate to a deep weathered bronze depending on age and rank. They moved with a kind of unhurried certainty that I came to understand was the center of their whole culture. They had held this frontier for a long time. They had held a great many frontiers for a long time. They were not cruel, exactly, the way I had been warned they might be. They were worse than cruel in a way that is harder to name. They were certain. Certainty in a thing that has never been beaten is its own kind of weather, and you learn to walk under it the way you learn to walk under the Tavi sun, with your head down and your business in front of you. The man who ran the human side of the depot was named Tomas Hale, and the first thing I noticed about him was that he did not walk with his head down. He was old, not old the way some men dress up as old, with a careful gray and a careful stoop. He was old all the way through, the kind of old that comes from a long time spent in hard sun doing hard things, and then a longer time spent doing quieter ones. His face was a map of weather. His hands were the size and color of old leather work gloves, and they moved slowly, and they never moved wrong. He had retired out of the infantry a long time before, the record said, and then unretired into this caretaker, well-keeper, the man who kept the water moving and the pumps honest and the depot from rusting back into the dust it stood on. He had been at hold 11 years. He was, as far as the Kashun were concerned, furniture. Useful furniture. Furniture that knew where the valves were. And he had a dog. I want to tell you about Barrow plainly, because the whole of it turns on what he was, and what he was could not have looked less like what he turned out to be. Barrow was an English Mastiff, and he was the largest dog I have ever seen before or since. He stood as high as my hip at the shoulder and weighed, Hale told me once, somewhere north of 90 kilos, though Hale also said he had stopped weighing him years back because there was no point in knowing a number you could not change. His coat was a fawn so pale the sun had nearly bleached it to bone, with a black mask over the muzzle that had gone gray at the edges. His face hung in folds. His eyes were dark and wet and impossibly calm, set deep, and when he looked at you it was without urgency of any kind, the look of something that had already decided you were not a problem and saw no reason to revisit the question. He was old too. 8-9, Hale wasn't sure. On Tavi a dog his size showing his years should not, by any reckoning I knew, have been worth the water it took to keep him. He spent the bright part of every day asleep in the shade of the gate, a great pale heap of dog laid out in the cool strip where the wall's shadow fell, rising twice a day to eat and once or twice more to walk the fence line beside Hale at a pace that could not be called more than ambling. He snored. He drooled. He sighed enormous sighs that you could hear across the yard. When the heat broke in the evening, he would roll onto his back in the dust with all four legs in the air, and the Kashun sentries on the wall would point and make the soft clicking sound that was, I learned, their laughter. That was the dog they told me about on my 4th day, so they could laugh. It was a sub-holder named Oru who told me, a young one, bronze going slate at the joints, ambitious in the way of someone who has not yet been told no by anything that mattered. He found me at the depot office logging a water transfer, and he leaned in the doorway and clicked at me, friendly enough, and asked if I had met the human war beast yet. I said I didn't know what he meant. He took me to the gate to show me. Barrow was asleep in his strip of shade, vast and pale and entirely indifferent to the two of us standing over him. Oru crouched down, careful even in his mockery to stay an arm's length back, and gestured at the dog with the flat of his hand the way you'd present an exhibit. "This," he said in the trade pidgin we used, "is what the humans brought to defend their depot. We brought hounds bred 40 generations for the line. The humans brought this." Barrow opened one eye. He looked at Oru for a moment, without alarm and without interest. Then he closed the eye and went back to sleep. Oru clicked, delighted. "It does not even rise. A Kashun child could take this gate from it. I have seen the things the humans call dangerous, and I confess I am disappointed. 11 years your people have held this strip, and this is your watchman." He straightened and dusted his hands and looked down at the sleeping dog with the particular warmth of a man who has just confirmed something he wanted to believe. "When the Dren come, and they will come, cadet, this season or the next, I would not stand behind that animal. I would not stand behind the old man either. The humans should be glad we are here." I did not have an answer for him that would have helped anyone. I logged my water transfer. I went back to my prefab. I did not think much more about the dog, except to note privately that Oru had stayed an arm's length back the whole time, the way you stand back from a thing you are very sure about. It was Hale who taught me the first lesson, though he did not mean to teach me anything. He rarely did. He was not a talker. But on my 2nd week the garrison brought their mallhound down to the depot to drink, because the upper cisterns were being cleaned, and I happened to be at the gate when they did, and I saw a thing I have turned over in my mind a great many times since. The mallhound was the garrison's pride. Its name, as near as the sounds rendered, was Gade. It was the apex of 40 generations of breeding, exactly as Oru had said, a war beast the size of a small horse, all corded muscle under a hide like dark slate plate, with a low square head and a mouth that did not entirely close over the teeth. It was beautiful the way a piece of artillery is beautiful. The Kashun handled it with long poles and a great deal of ceremony, and the sentries gave it room, and even Oru, who feared the human dog so little, fell quiet when it passed. Gade had killed 3 of its own handlers over the years. That was not a secret. That was, among the garrison, a point of pride. A beast worth keeping was a beast that had to be kept carefully. They brought it down through the gate to the lower trough, 4 handlers on the poles, and the whole yard arranged itself around the procession, the way iron filings arrange around a magnet. And Barrow was asleep in the gate's shade, directly in the mallhound's path. I watched the handlers slow. I watched them confer in the soft clicks. And then I watched the most powerful animal on that whole frontier, a war beast bred for 40 generations to fear nothing that walked, alter its course to go the long way around the sleeping earth dog. Not far around, a meter maybe 2, but it went around. It did not snarl. It did not test. It dropped its great square head a fraction as it passed the strip of shade, the way you lower your eyes in a place you do not entirely own, and it took the longer line to the trough, and the handlers led it, and not one of them said a word about it. They drank the beast and they took it back up the hill. And the whole time Barrow did not so much as twitch an ear. I looked at Hale. He was standing by the pump housing with a wrench in his hand, and he had watched the whole thing the way you watch a sunrise you have seen 10,000 times. He saw me looking. He did not smile exactly. The corner of his mouth moved. "Their hound's no fool," he said. That was all. He went back to the pump. I told myself a number of comfortable things about what I had seen. I told myself the mallhound smelled something, a sickness, a scent marker, some chemical fact about the old dog I was not equipped to read. I told myself animals are strange and instinct is stranger, and there was no need to make a story out of it. I was good at telling myself comfortable things in those years. The frontier teaches you that habit early, because the uncomfortable things are usually true and usually too big to do anything about. And a junior liaison's whole job is to keep the small machinery turning while the big facts grind along over everyone's head. But I noticed after that the Kashun sentries who laughed at Barrow from the wall never came down and laughed at him up close. And I noticed that Hale, who fed the dog twice a day from a battered steel bowl, always set the bowl down himself and never let one of the garrison's people near it, and that the garrison's people, for all their clicking, never once asked to come near. The mockery did not stop. If anything, it grew, the way mockery does when the thing being mocked refuses to react. Oru made a game of it. He would bring younger subholders down to the gate to show them the human war beast, and they would crouch their careful arms length back and click and rate it too fat, too slow, too old, a disgrace, a joke. They began to call Hale the kennel master, which in their tongue carried a barb I won't try to translate, something about a man whose only worth was the keeping of a useless thing. Hale answered to it the way he answered to everything, which was not to answer at all. He kept the water moving. He kept the pumps honest. He walked the fence at dawn and dusk with the great pale dog ambling at his hip, and twice a day he set down the steel bowl with his own 2 hands. I asked him about it once. We were on the fence walk, the cool of the evening just starting to come down, and Barrow was a slow, pale shape between us, and I asked Hale whether the garrison's clicking ever got under his skin. He thought about it for a good while. Hale thought about everything for a good while. It was one of the things I came to value in him, the way he refused to spend a word he hadn't earned. "They've never been beat," he said finally. "That's all it is. A thing that's never been beat can't picture losing. It's not a flaw in them exactly, it's just a hole where the picture ought to be." He walked a few more steps. The dog sighed. "I've been beat," Hale said. "Long time ago. You don't forget the shape of it changes how you stand." He nodded ahead at the dust plain going gold in the low sun. "Their hound's been beat too, somewhere down in the blood of it. That's why it goes around." I asked him what he meant. He didn't answer that. He whistled, low, 2 notes, and Barrow's great head came up and turned, and the 3 of us finished the walk in the kind of quiet that doesn't need filling. The dren came, the way Oru had promised, though not the way anyone expected. I should explain the dren, because the garrison's contempt for them is half of how the night went the way it did. The dren were raiders, a scattered people who lived between the holdings of larger powers and made their living off the edges of them, and the Kashun held them in a contempt so total it had calcified into a kind of blindness. The dren struck soft targets. They took what they could carry and they ran before anything serious could be brought against them. In 40 years on the Tavi line, the Kashun had never once treated a dren probe as anything but a nuisance, because for 40 years that had been exactly true. The first probe came in the dead heat of an afternoon, 3 dren skiffs sliding low over the dust to test the depot's eastern fence, and the garrison's response told me everything about how the night would later unravel. The sentries on the wall watched the skiffs come. They did not sound an alarm. They did not move the mallhound or the heavy weapons or anything at all. Oru came down to the gate to watch, and he was almost merry about it, and he told me the dren were testing whether anyone was home and would leave the moment they saw the garrison's colors on the wall. He was right. The skiffs circled once, well out of range, and slid off east into the haze. The garrison clicked at them as they went, the soft clicking laughter, the same sound they made at the old dog. Hale watched the skiffs the whole time they were in sight, and he did not click. That evening he did a thing I had not seen him do. After the fence walk he did not take Barrow back to the shade by the gate. He brought the dog to the eastern fence, the side the skiffs had probed, and he stood there a long while in the failing light looking out at the dust where the skiffs had gone, and the dog stood beside him looking the same way, and neither of them moved for the better part of an hour. I asked him the next morning what he'd been watching for. "They counted us," Hale said. "He was greasing a pump bearing unhurried. Probe like that, they're not testing if anyone's home. Garrison thinks that. Garrison's wrong. They know the garrison's home. Everybody on this line knows the garrison's home. They were counting the line. How many on the wall, how long to the alarm where the soft seam is." He wiped his hands. "There's a soft seam at the east fence where the lease strip meets the Kashun ground. 2 chains of command, neither one sure whose job that gate is. The Dren found it in one pass." He looked at me, and for the first time since I'd met him, there was something in his old weathered face that I would have to call worry, except it was a worry so steady and so long practiced it had stopped looking like fear and started looking like arithmetic. "They'll come back. Not a probe. The garrison won't move on it because the garrison can't picture losing, so it's going to fall to whoever's standing at the east gate when they do." I asked him who that would be. He looked over at the gate, where the great pale dog had settled back into his strip of shade for the day, vast and bone-colored and asleep, and Hale did not say anything at all. He just looked at the dog, and then he went back to the pump, and I felt the first cold finger of understanding go down my spine, the understanding that the comfortable things I had been telling myself for 3 weeks were about to be taken away from me one at a time. I took it up the hill that afternoon, the way my job said I should. I went to Holder Vren, who commanded the garrison, and I told him what Hale had told me, the counting, the soft seam, the east gate, the warning that the next visit would not be a probe. Vren was old for a Kashun, deep bronze, scarred along one side of the jaw from some war I would never hear the name of, and he heard me out with a courtesy that was worse than rudeness. When I had finished, he clicked, softly, the way you click at a child who has brought you a drawing. "The kennel master reads the sky and tells you the Dren are coming," he said. "Cadet, the Dren have been coming to this line since before your species learned to leave its world. They probe, they posture, they run. We have buried more Dren at the foot of this wall than your depot has held water." He rose, which was a courtesy too, a dismissal dressed as respect. "Tell your old man we are grateful for his vigilance. Tell him to keep the water moving and let the garrison keep the line. And tell him," and here the click came again, and it was not unkind, which was the worst of it, "that if the Dren ever did come in earnest, he and his sleeping animal would be safest behind our wall, with the rest of the helpless things." I went back down the hill. I told Hale none of it. He didn't ask. He already knew the shape of the answer. He'd had it read off him by 40 generations of certainty long before I ever climbed the hill. What he did instead was begin to get ready in his slow and unhurried way, and the readiness was so quiet that I nearly missed it. He moved the dog's water to the east fence. He cleared the dust and debris from a 40-meter stretch along that fence, so the ground was flat and open, and there was nowhere for a low skiff to come in under cover. He checked the gate hinges, which were Kashun steel and sound, and he checked the bar, and he oiled the bar so it would drop fast and silent. He did all of this between his regular work, never hurrying, never explaining. And the garrison on the wall watched the kennel master fuss at his fence and clicked among themselves and thought nothing of it. And in the evenings he took Barrow to the east gate instead of the shade by the main gate, and the two of them stood the long watch in the failing light. And the dog, who I had never once seen do anything but sleep and eat and amble, began to spend the cool hours awake, sitting at the east fence with his great head up, and his dark, wet eyes pointed at the haze where the skiffs had gone. I started spending the evenings there too. I told myself it was the job, that as liaison I ought to keep eyes on a developing situation. The truth is I had come to need to be near the old man and his dog when the light went down, because they were the only 2 things on that whole frontier that did not seem certain of anything, which had begun to feel, in the way these things creep up on you, like the only honest company on the planet. On one of those evenings, I finally asked Hale the question I'd been carrying since the day the mallhound walked the long way around. I asked him what Barrow was. He was quiet a long while. The dog sat between us, awake, watching the east. The sun was nearly down, and the sky had gone the deep bruised gold it went on Tavi just before dark, and the heat was finally lifting off the dust in slow waves you could see. "He's a dog," Hale said. "That's the first thing, and don't ever forget it, because everybody who gets in trouble with him forgets it. He's a dog. He likes his bowl, and he likes his walk, and he likes to sleep in the shade, and he loves 3 people in this galaxy, and I'm one of them." He reached over without looking and laid one of his huge old leather hands on the dog's vast skull, and the dog leaned into it, half a ton of pressure put through a gentle lean, and Hale did not so much as shift his weight. "But where I come from," Hale said, "the world is harder than this one. The sun's worse and the cold's worse, and there were always things in the dark bigger than a man, and a long time ago we and the dogs made a deal about that. We'd feed them and we'd keep them and we'd love them, and in return, when the dark came with teeth in it, they'd stand between it and us. That deal's older than any treaty your office ever filed, Cadet. Older than writing. We didn't make Barrow's kind to be soft. We made them soft on purpose because a thing that can do what they can do has to be soft the rest of the time, or you couldn't live beside it. The softness is the leash. It's not the dog." He took his hand off the dog's head. "The garrison sees the softness and thinks that's all there is," Hale said. "Their hound smells what's under it. That's the whole difference between them. One of them's afraid of the right thing." I asked him, and I am not proud of how small my voice was, I asked him whether Barrow could really hold the east gate against the Dren, whether one old dog could do what a garrison wouldn't. Hale looked at me, and the corner of his mouth moved, and it was almost kind. "No," he said, "one old dog can't hold a gate, don't be foolish." He looked back out at the dark coming on. "But he doesn't have to hold the gate, he just has to hold the seam. The Dren aren't coming to take a wall, they can't take a wall, they're raiders, they'll break on the wall same as always. They're coming for the soft seam the garrison left open, the place where 2 chains of command both think the gate is someone else's. They'll pour in there fast and quiet and be inside the depot before the garrisons even sounded the alarm. 40, maybe 60 of them in and out before the wall knows it's happening." He nodded down at the dog. "Somebody's got to be standing in that seam when they come. Awake, already there, not coming when called, already there." The dog's ears moved, tracking something out in the dark I couldn't hear. "That's the whole job," Hale said. "Be there first and don't move and make them come through you. He's done it before, so have I. Neither of us has forgotten the shape of it." I did not sleep well after that, in the nights that followed, and there were 6 of them before the Dren came in earnest. And I have laid out everything that happened in those 6 days at perhaps more length than the night itself deserves, because I have come to believe the night only went the way it did because of the 6 days. And the 6 days only happened because one old man and one old dog could picture losing, and a whole garrison of the finest soldiers on the frontier could not. They came on the 7th night, in the last black hour before the Tavi dawn. I was at the east fence. I had taken to staying the whole night there by then, wrapped in a thermal against the desert cold, sitting against the prefab wall a little behind where Hale kept his watch. Hale was at the gate. Barrow was at the seam, the open stretch of cleared ground where the lease strip met the Kashun line, sitting upright and awake in the dark, his pale coat the only thing the starlight caught, a great bone-colored shape facing east into nothing. The first I knew of it was the dog. He stood up. I had been 3.5 weeks at Hold 19, and in all that time I had seen Barrow rise to eat, rise to walk, rise to roll in the dust, and every one of those risings had been slow, an old heavy animal levering itself up against its own years and the planet's heat. This was not that. This was the pale shape simply being on its feet between one breath and the next, no scramble, no effort, the great head dropping level and the ears coming forward and the whole enormous weight of him settling down into his haunches in a way that made the loose folds of his hide go tight. He did not bark. He did not growl. He made no sound at all. He faced east, into the dark, and he went so still that he stopped looking like a dog and started looking like a thing the dark had hit and broken against. Hale was up too, at the gate, a black shape against the stars. He did not call out. He did not raise an alarm. He stood at the gate with one hand resting on the oiled bar, and he watched the dog and he waited. I heard the skiffs a half-second before I saw them, a low fast hum coming in off the dust with no lights, hugging the ground, more of them than I could count in the dark. They came straight at the seam, exactly where Hale had said they would, exactly where the garrison had left it open. A fast, quiet wedge of raiders pouring in through the one place on the whole line where nobody on the wall thought it was their job to look. I heard the first skiff ground out and the soft scrabble of dren coming off it, and I heard another, and another, and the night filled up with the small sounds of a great many bodies moving fast and low toward a gate they believed was empty. Up on the wall, nothing. The garrison slept under its certainty. The alarm had not sounded. It would not sound for another 4 minutes, and by then everything that was going to be decided would already be decided down at the seam in the dark by an old man's hand on a bar and an old dog's weight on the open ground. Hale said one word. He did not shout it. He said it the way you'd say a thing across a quiet room to someone you'd said it to 10,000 times before. I have thought a great deal about what the word was, and the truth is it was nothing. It was the kind of word you'd give a dog to send it after a thrown ball on a slow afternoon. A small, soft, ordinary word that in any other hour would have meant nothing at all. And the old dog went forward into the dark. Here I have to tell you that I did not see what happened in the seam, and I want to be honest about that, because every account of that night that's worth anything is honest about it. It was the black hour before dawn, and the cleared ground beyond the gate was full of fast-moving shapes, and then it was full of something else, something low and pale and silent that had gone into the middle of them. And the night came apart into sounds I will not try to render, and a confusion I could not see the edges of. I know that the small, organized sounds of a raid going to plan stopped, very fast, and were replaced by sounds that were not organized at all. I know that the pale shape was at the center of it, and that it did not stop, and it did not slow, and it did not make a single sound of its own through any of it, and that the only voice in the whole black confusion was the dren's, rising. I know that some of them tried to come through, because that was the plan. The plan was to pour through the soft seam into the depot, and I know that the seam did not open. I know that whatever the old dog was doing in the dark, the wedge of raiders broke against it the way water breaks against a stone, and stalled, and began, I could hear it in the changed pitch of the sounds, began to want very badly to be somewhere else. Hale stood at the gate the entire time with his hand on the bar, and did not move. The alarm finally sounded up on the wall, 4 minutes too late, a great mournful Kashun horn that meant the garrison had at last understood that the line was being tested in earnest. Lights came up along the wall. The mallhound was loosed. I heard the handler's poles clatter and the heavy thunder of Gade coming down off the high ground at last, and the garrison came awake and armed and certain, 4 full minutes after the only minutes that mattered. And by the time they got down to the east seam with their lights and their war beast and their heavy weapons, there was nothing left for them to do. The dawn came up the way it always did on Tavi all at once, that flat white light pouring over the dust plain and leaving no honest shadows. And in the gray-going gold of it, I finally saw the cleared ground beyond the east gate, and I will not describe it to you, because there is nothing in describing it that would do anyone any good, and because the old dog himself, when he came back through the gate into the first light, would not have wanted it described. The seam had held. The dren that had come through it in earnest had not gotten into the depot, not one of them, and the ones who could still move were a long way east by then and going farther. And the line that the garrison had been so certain of, the line they had told me an old man and a sleeping animal would be safest behind, the line had been held at the one place the garrison left open, by the one thing the garrison left out. Barrow came back through the gate slow. He was himself again. The terrible level stillness had gone out of him, and the old heaviness had come back, and he ambled in through the open gate with his great head low, and his pale coat fouled with the dust of the seam, and he went to Hale, and Hale knelt down in front of him in the first light with both of those huge old leather hands, and ran them over the dog from skull to flank, slow, checking, the way you check a thing you love after it has done a thing you would have given anything for it not to have to do. The dog leaned into him. Hale held the great head against his chest a moment. He did not say anything. There was nothing on his old weathered face that I could put a name to, except that it was the face of a man keeping a very old promise that had cost him, again, exactly what it had always cost him. Then he got the steel bowl, and he filled it from the east fence water, and he set it down himself, the way he always had, and the old dog drank. The garrison stood at the seam and looked at what had held it, and they were very quiet. I have thought often about that quiet. It was not the quiet of gratitude, though I think some of them were grateful, in the way you are grateful to a thing you do not understand. It was the quiet of the hole in the picture finally being filled in. Holder Vren came down himself, scarred and bronze in the new light, and he stood at the open gate and he looked out at the cleared ground, and then he looked for a long while at the old pale dog drinking from a steel bowl, and the certainty that I had walked under for 3.5 weeks like weather went out of his face and did not come back. He did not click. He did not say the soft, laughing thing. He turned after a while and he looked at Hale, and he did a thing I had never seen a Kashun do to a human, which was to lower his great scarred head, just slightly, the same fraction the mallhound had lowered its head the day it walked the long way around the shade. The same gesture, from the master and the beast both. One of them had known the right thing to be afraid of all along. The other one had just learned. Up on the wall, behind Vren, the mallhound gate had stopped at the top of the ramp. The garrison's pride, the apex of 40 generations, the war beast that had killed 3 of its own handlers and feared nothing that walked, it had come down the hill at the alarm, and it had reached the top of the ramp above the east seam, and there it had stopped. It would not come down to the seam. It stood at the top of the ramp with its great square head low, and it looked down at the old earth dog drinking from his bowl, and it did not come one step closer. And after a while the handlers, who understood their beast better than they understood anything, took it quietly back up the hill. Oru never said the word kennel master again. None of them did. The barb went out of the garrison overnight, the way a thing goes out of people when the world has corrected them in front of each other. They did not become warm. The Kashun are not a warm people, and a single night does not unmake 40 generations. But the clicking laughter stopped, and the sentries who used to point at the dog from the wall now watched him pass below with something careful in the set of their bodies. And when the mallhound came down to drink, they no longer brought it through the main gate at all, but the long way around, so that it would not have to pass the strip of shade where the old dog slept. The Dren did not come back that season. They did not come back the next either, and the line at Hold 19 held quiet for the rest of my posting, and I would like to tell you it was the garrison's wall that kept them off, but the garrison and I both knew it wasn't. It was the word that had gone out east along the Dren's own scattered lines, the word raiders carry better than any people I ever met, the word that there was a soft seam at the human depot on Tavi that was not soft at all, that there was a thing kept there in the bright shade by the gate that you did not want to come through in the dark, that the humans had brought to that frontier something that slept all day and asked for nothing and would, if you made it, do once cleanly in the black hour. The oldest job there is. I left Hold 19 the following year, rotated out the way junior liaisons always are, my paperwork filed and my patience spent, and a great deal more learned than my office had ever meant to teach me. I said my goodbyes at the gate. Hale shook my hand with one of those huge old leather hands and told me to keep my head up, which I understood by then to be the highest thing he knew how to say to a person, and I crouched down and said goodbye to Barrow, who was laid out in his strip of shade in the bright part of the day, vast and pale and bone-colored and asleep. He opened one dark eye and looked at me, without alarm, without urgency, the look of something that had decided a long time ago that I was not a problem and had seen that one black hour no reason at all to revisit the question. Then he sighed an enormous sigh that I could hear across the yard, and he closed the eye, and he went back to sleep in the bright shade by the gate, the way the oldest promise in the world sleeps, soft on purpose, the leash and not the dog, waiting in the daylight for a dark that knew better now than to come. I have served on harder lines since, and under prouder garrisons, and I have watched a great many certain people learn the shape of losing. But I have never again seen a thing so feared by everyone who understood it and so laughed at by everyone who didn't. And I have come to think that is the truest measure of what the old man tried to tell me on the fence walk, in the gold light, with his hand on the dog's great skull. The softness is the leash. It was never the dog.